We're learning what Tucker Carlson texted that was so worrisome to Fox executives and the board that it reportedly contributed to his firing. The New York Times reported on the message, which was sent on January 7th, 2021, obviously a pivotal day right after the insurrection, just hours after those riots at the Capitol. And he was talking about a video he saw of Trump supporters beating up, in his words, an Antifa kid. It was redacted in the Dominion lawsuit court filings, but here's what part of the Times says is behind that big black box at the bottom, right, of those filings. A quote from Tucker's text, it read, quote, "It was 3 against 1, at least. Jumping a guy like that is dishonorable, obviously. It's not how white men fight. Yet suddenly I found myself rooting for the mob against the man, hoping they'd hit him harder, kill him. I really wanted them to hurt the kid. I could taste it. Then somewhere deep in my brain, an alarm went off. This isn't good for me. I'm becoming something I don't want to be." Close quote. The Times was only able to unveil the contents of that text through interviews with people who spoke on the condition of anonymity. CNN reached out for comment. Fox declined. Carlson did not immediately respond.
Back with us now, writer-at-large for the New York Times, Jen Rittenberg, who helped break this story. We were talking about, you can't just say, yes, this is ultimately what led to it, but it's also the way that this came out and how executives found out about this, and we're seeing this message right before they were set to go to trial. What is the impact that had of when they learned about this?
Well, as we understand it, the board the trial was supposed to start on a Monday. Going into that weekend, the board had asked to see some of the redacted messages. There are negotiations about a potential settlement. The jury is coming together. So the board starts going through the messages, finds this one message that they find very troubling. Some senior executives were told hadn't been focused on this message. And it's not what you want to see when you're going into trial. A jury's being impaneled, and you're negotiating what's going to be a potentially very high number to get out of this. So you don't have to put something like this in front of a jury.
But for this text message being revealed to the board and Fox executives the night before the trial was supposed to begin, would there have been a trial and no settlement?
They were definitely working toward a settlement. And we were told that over the weekend, Lachlan Murdoch, one of the leaders of the company, had told his lawyers, let's start moving up on the number to get out of this anyway. I mean, that trial was going to be potentially disastrous on so many levels. So, but here again, you see, when it comes to Tucker Carlson, the issue here is that he's playing an outsized role in terms of problems in the case for them, when he's really not a huge part of the case. And that represents the trouble with Tucker Carlson to management at this point, among other things.
And the questions that still remain of why they did not settle sooner, because all of this damaging information came out, though obviously this came out as a part of good reporting. Abby Grossberg is the former Fox News producer who is now suing the network, and she was on with Anderson last night. She was talking about essentially the way things worked, and when it came to the fight that we all watched play out so dramatically in Washington over Kevin McCarthy and his bid to become House Speaker. She said this is what they talked about behind the scenes.
They believed that he could broker who was Speaker, House Speaker. He wanted to do that live on air, but Kevin McCarthy said no.
What do you mean he wanted to do that live on air?
His plan was to have Kevin McCarthy come on the show. So fast forward to January 5th, they start asking me to book McCarthy on the show that night. I had worked with him a lot when I was at Sunday Morning Futures and had a relationship with his team. That afternoon, Justin came in and he said, here's the plan. Tucker's going to first have Kevin on, hear him beg and grovel. Then we'll bring in Matt Gaetz, and Matt Gaetz will then kind of set his terms. Then Tucker will set his terms that McCarthy has to agree to.
Tucker Carlson had terms that McCarthy
had terms. And we're going to make this whole thing happen on air and save the Republican Party. Now, fortunately, for McCarthy's sake, he said no.
Speaks to the level of influence.
I mean, and that's why this is in a way so shocking. Look at that level of political influence that Tucker Carlson had. I mean, he was a power in the part of the party that's the tail wagging the dog right now. And so to suddenly be cut is really amazing. But that shows also this symbiosis that could happen with the Fox primetime and people in power, particularly Republicans. We saw it with the Trump White House, so here you see it again.
Yeah.
Jim, again, as Caitlin said, this came because of good reporting to you and your team. Kudos. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Let's talk about this and a lot more with the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Semaphore, Ben Smith. Also, perfect person to talk to because you just have this new book out that we're going to talk about as well called Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the Billion-Dollar Race to Go Viral. You write a lot about the rise of right-wing populism online. So we'll get to the book in a minute, but wow, this Tucker text, do you think that's why this thing didn't go to trial?
I mean, this was the thing that I think every reporter was trying to get, and kudos to the Times for figuring it out. And, you know, the thing with a lot of the reasons people say that Tucker Carlson was fired, I think that there are a lot of viewers who would not be totally shocked to see him say something that racist. But Fox had been somehow in their own minds, I guess, holding up this line that you know, all these allegations of racism against Tucker and against Fox were totally false. And I do think this line about this is how white men fight may have been the last straw for them there. Made it harder to pretend anything else. The rest of the text is very dark and reflective, but I think less likely to be the thing that triggered his firing.
Yeah, and we haven't seen Fox or Tucker Carlson comment on that text so far. We'll see what they say. On your book, you talk a lot about, and we're talking about how the media landscape is changing, especially with Carlson's departure from a huge slot on Fox News. You talk about, in this book, BuzzFeed, which of course you were editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed News, and all of these sites that depended on traffic to go viral, and also how they built so many of their company models based off of Facebook. But then once that stopped being a venue for them to use, they shrunk essentially.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about those sort of early days of building social media and sort of hunting for traffic when I was watching this Carlson thing, because, you know, a lot of that, there was a perception that the early internet was, among other things, left-wing. Facebook was, Barack Obama visited Facebook, because obviously Facebook is a democratic institution for college kids that helped Barack Obama get out the vote. And I think a lot of people in that early sort of online world thought, well, the election of Barack Obama is like the culmination of this new digital revolution. And I think but when I looked back at like who was building this world, in fact, a lot of these early right-wing figures, Andrew Breitbart, Steve Bannon, we're there all along. We're very interested. We're studying these digital media tools. And as the universe of people on social media, on digital media grew, you saw these conservatives really make the most of them and channel a lot of the anger that you also see in conservative cable, just that raw, often racially divisive anger, and take that to really fuel, among other things, the Trump campaign in 2016, and then Trump's election is kind of the culmination of that whole moment.
I mean, you talk about them basically sitting down in the way you describe it, the white IKEA table from the progressive internet scene looking over the shoulder. This really struck me on page 43. You wrote, Obama and Trump, the Huffington Post and Breitbart, it's hard to imagine they'd have much in common, yet both movements were rooted in part in the new way of thinking about people that came when you saw them as traffic, obviously part of your title, measuring interest and intent and channeling it into action. What have we learned from that as we look at a completely new media landscape that in some ways is reverting back to the old, what were deemed sort of dinosaurs, coming back into prominence as some of these others go away?
Yeah, I mean, there was this early moment on the internet, and I was, marginally part of it, but sites like Gawker and BuzzFeed that I write about were, it was like you were flying and suddenly you had instruments and you could see everything and you could see exactly who was looking at what. And when it came to this kind of political stuff, you could see, wow, the most divisive stuff, particularly sometimes the stuff that pushes the edge hardest is what attracts people. And Facebook then built this kind of a mechanism, where they were also looking for engagement, looking to see, well, what do people stick to? And what will people comment on? And often people will comment on the most outrageous thing, the most shocking thing. And there was a period that I think alienated a lot of people from these platforms, where that was where you opened Facebook and what you saw was the thing most likely to outrage you. And that was a choice.
And that was not always a given. There was this, it's hard to remember this now, but there was a brief period where people thought they would be embarrassed to share things like that, or they would be embarrassed to get in shouting matches on the internet. Clearly not where we've ended up.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were very utopian about, that among other things, right, that when media is social, when it's open, people are going to share fundraisers for earthquakes, they're going to share pictures of cats, nobody would ever go on this big public space and just start yelling about politics, because what a crazy, unpleasant thing to do, and everybody will hate you. That didn't exactly turn out to be how human nature works. Facebook also tweaked some dials because they kind of saw and liked the level of engagement and stickiness you got when people are screaming at each other about politics.
But as Caitlin points out, it's a choice. It's our choice. It's still a human choice.
It's a human choice, but I think with one of the things we saw was that the choices these big tech companies make can nudge
Totally.
you.
Totally.
Yeah, I think it's more the choice that Facebook made on stuff like this. The book's fascinating.
Congrats.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.